And here we are, friends. Once again, look at this. We got quite a few of us, and it's cooled off significantly. Don't feel so darn silly having a fire. You know, it's always nice to be around a fire, regardless of the temperature. You just have to sit a little farther back like we're doing. Yeah, and I got a cold drink instead of some hot coffee. That'll make it a little better. Well, it's good to see so many of you. Find a place to get seated and let's get started telling stories. Well, this is a Hank Dillon story. You know, Hank Dillon, the Bigfoot hunter. And it's only here on the Hidden Corners. Ginger writes these stories and does a darn good job. I don't mind telling you how these work out. Now, this is Project Silva. The Cryptid War Begins. Part 3. I think I kind of remember where we left off. This is going to be a good one. Well, in the last explosive episode, Facility Black Dome, once the most secure and secretive cryptid research base in North America, had fallen. It wasn't abandoned, it wasn't decommissioned, it was erased, as if it never really existed. Now, every file, recording, specimen report, and personnel log that was not burnt when the facility went down, it had been boxed up and buried, hidden in a forgotten warehouse off of the Capitol Beltway on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. In that secret government warehouse were rows upon rows of gray metal shelves and long, dusty aisles with file boxes stamped classified in red ink, sealed with steel wire. I'll never again see the light of day. Now, back in Denver, Wade and Hank now realized their father's involvement with the mysterious man called Ghost Horse and Project Silva. But just how deep was his knowledge of the activities inside Facility Black Dome? That's a question. Well, and now let's continue on with the story. The sun, it rose like a torch over the Nevada basin, flattening shadows and cooking the earth in a dry, merciless light. Heat shimmered off the hard pan in waves of mirage. Dust curled behind the hooves of the Palomino stallion, as if it carried its rider across the cracked land with a steady, deliberate gait. Ghost Horse doesn't rush. He never did. Wearing a battered wide-brim hat and a long canvas duster, the same color as the desert sand, he rode in silence, eyes hidden beneath the brim, fixed on the ridgeline ahead. A sheathed combat knife rested against his thigh. A sidearm rode his hip. Everything else was muscle memory. Behind him, tucked into a cleft in the red rock hills, was his hidden bunker, solar-powered, radio shielded, and stocked with everything he might need to disappear for months. But this morning he wasn't disappearing. Up the canyon trail, where creosote gave way to juniper and then to pine, the land cooled just slightly, enough for the old homestead to survive, perched on a forgotten high pasture that the world had long stopped noticing. The farmhouse was crooked with time, the boards gray, the tin roof rusted. But the people inside, well, they were steady. An old man stepped out onto the porch, rolling up his sleeves. His wife stood just behind the screen door watching. Neither one of them smiled. Neither of them asked any questions. They never did. Ghost Horse dismounted, patting the stallion's flank once before walking it towards the open barn. Inside, under tarps and hay bales, he slid the doors back just wide enough to pull out his armored hybrid Jeep. It's a matte black desert rig, stripped down and rebuilt with reinforced plating, spare fuel cells, and gear optimized for both speed and silence. Not military issue. It was better. "You be gone long?" the old man asked, wiping his hands on his coveralls. Ghost Horse paused. His voice, when it came, was low, a sound like gravel dragged through smoke. "Long enough." "We'll feed your horse," the man said simply. Ghost Horse gave a nod of gratitude, and that was all that passed between them. Before he left, the woman handed him a worn canteen and a small leather pouch filled with cedar shavings and sage. "For the road," she said, "and for the ones you might meet." He took it without a word. They didn't know what he was. Well, not exactly. But they knew enough not to ask. Ghost Horse was no longer government, not in any official capacity. Too many betrayals, too many buried operations. But deep inside Project Silva, past the chain of command and black budgets, he was still essential. He was the only one who could truly track the cryptids, the only one who knew how to communicate with them. He was the only one that they couldn't control. They used to call him a handler. They stopped after he threatened to burn the facility to the ground and vanished into the high desert for more years than most of them could remember. Now, he was something else. Part man, part myth. A rogue agent turned to frequencies that didn't exist on paper. A veteran of wars most people would never even read about. A ghost, riding the fringe of reality. And somewhere out there, one of his was calling. Cryptid 013 was free. He closed his eyes. 13. The name pulsed again behind his temples. Not a voice, a resonance, a presence. He opened his eyes. Time to move. Deep in the heart of the Rockies, a team in hazmat suits sifted through some scorched debris. The earth surrounding the charred remains of Facility Black Dome was cracked, irradiated, and raw. Ash drafted on the wind like snow. What hadn't been burnt had been buried. What wasn't buried had been erased. They moved in silence, searching for any remnants of what had been housed here previously. They carried high-powered metal detectors designed to detect more than metal, calibrated to locate cryogenic units, encrypted data cores, biocontainment capsules, things that shouldn't exist, things that were never supposed to leave the facility. One of them paused, the detector pulsing with a sudden urgency. It was a shrill, narrow tone. He dropped to one knee and brushed away the ash with a gloved hand. And beneath the debris was a glass cryo-containment cylinder, remarkably intact. Inside of it, a tooth, thick and curved, almost serpentine. He glanced around quickly, then slipped the object into his pocket. What remained of the facility had been scrubbed from every federal database system within hours of the incident. No records, no blueprints, certainly no history and no survivors. As far as the outside world was concerned, nothing had ever been built on that remote site in Colorado. 11 miles from the Pentagon in Langley, Virginia, sits the Central Intelligence Agency headquarters, housed in the George Bush Center for Intelligence building complex. The NASA Langley Research Center is situated nearby in Hampton, as well as the Langley Air Force Base. Behind 4 layers of biometric security, a black site debriefing was underway. 3 men sat around a long conference-sized table. One was in military uniform, and one from the intelligence agency, and the third, older than the other 2, wore no badge at all. He opened a large manila folder containing grainy black and white 8x10 photographs, half-human figures suspended in fluid. We were trying to create an entity we could control, a next-generation solution to asymmetrical warfare. What we got was something else entirely. We developed something that could think for itself, something that doesn't see itself as an experiment anymore. He looked up from the folder. If the public ever learns that the U.S. government sanctioned the genetic fusion of humans and cryptids, if they ever got their hands on these photographs, there's absolutely no telling what would happen. It would be a national scandal unlike anything that we've ever seen before. He reached into his pocket and he took out a small gold-plated lighter. Gentlemen, as far as I know, these are the only known photographs that exist of Project Silva's experiments. And with that, he lit the corner of the envelope with a flame. The gold-plated lighter gleamed briefly in his hand before he snapped it shut with a soft click, returned it to his coat pocket as the flames consumed the evidence. In Wade Dillon's law office, stacks of file folders and military field notebooks and dented metal ammo boxes recovered from the floorboards of the old family ranch house that had belonged to Merle Dillon, Wade's and Hank's father, covered that long mahogany conference table. Wade stood at the head of the table, flipping through old leather-bound journals, while Michelle quietly sorted through a pile of photographs, cross-referencing faces with names. Well, Hank sat opposite of him, cracking open a large olive-drab footlocker. Inside of it was a mix of documents sealed in vacuum-tight bags, a pair of military dog tags, and a single, thick manila envelope tied up with a faded green string. He slid it out carefully, untied the string, and opened it up. Inside were grainy black and white 8x10 photographs. The first photograph showed a man in a hospital gown, standing stiffly in front of a metal wall. He was a normal-looking feller, early 30s, military crew cut, lean build, tired eyes. Next were a set of x-rays wrapped in soft tissue. The next photo was of the same man taken weeks later, only now his arms were longer. The muscles warped, tendons were showing beneath skin stretched a little too tight. One eye had shrunken back into the skull, and the other glowed faintly. Several more photos showed the various stages of transformation. The last photo in the series was a blur. All that Hank could make out was a containment room with blood on the walls. No subject. The last attachment was a typed document stamped Project Silva, Level 6 clearance only. Subject 005. Behavioral drift accelerating. Neural bonding with cryptid DNA exceeding projections. Communication breakdown after day 14. Repeat, day 14. Subject no longer recognizes handlers. Termination order issued. Experiment deemed failure. How many more of these you think there are? Hank said as he passed the folder over to Wade. Well, at least 12 if they stopped at the current number 13, but what I want to know is why Dad had these. Michelle looked up from her pile of photographs that she had been sorting through. You know, this is frustrating. I feel like I'm looking for an invisible needle in a haystack. I don't know any of these faces, including your dad's, and there's very few repeats. Besides, some of these could have been taken years apart, so even though it might be the same person twice, I'm just not seeing that. I feel like I'm just no help at all. Hank walked over and put his arm around her shoulder. Look, I'm sorry, Michelle. I know this is tedious. We were just hoping. His voice stopped mid-sentence as he gazed down at one of the photographs in the pile in front of her. Is that Alexander Haig? He picked up the photo and he looked at it closely. Michelle shrugged her shoulders. I'm sorry, I don't know who that is. He was the Secretary of State during Reagan's term and the White House Chief of Staff under Nixon and Ford. And he was the youngest four-star general in the U.S. Army's history, and he's shaking Dad's hand. He picked up the stack of photographs and began sifting through them. Michelle walked over to the sofa where the dogs were sleeping. Sassy looked up and licked her hand. I really think that the two of you should be digging through this stuff. I don't know who any of these people are or what any of this might lead to, Michelle said. I don't feel like I'm helping by hanging around here. Hank, if I could borrow your truck, I'll take these dogs and go visit my uncle up in Manitou. Hank agreed, helped her get the dogs down the elevator and loaded them up in the truck. With a quick kiss goodbye, he watched her drive away. He felt he was on the brink of discovery, that something in his dad's belongings would lead them to an answer, or at least a plan, for what to do with all this information that they were sitting on. As he bounded up the last few stairs back to Wade's office, he whispered into the silence, "Dad, wherever you are, spirit world, heaven, send us a sign. Tell us what to do. Help us to find Ghost Horse." What he didn't know was that Ghost Horse was already on his way, cutting through the desert like a storm, coming straight for him. Far away from the city noise of Denver and miles from the devastation caused by the destruction of Black Dome, the forest breathed new life. Birds sang in the trees. Hawks cried out from their nests in the top of tall trees. Spider silks curled around the thick trunks of lodgepole pines and aspens. Hybrid 013 moved silently through the canopy of gold and green, massive frame barely disturbing the branches as he passed. A flicker of sun broke through the trees, illuminating the matted fur along his shoulders, slick with sweat and ash from his journey. This was his first true taste of freedom. He paused at a ridge, crouching low, his long arms resting across his knees. Below, a clearing shimmered in the slanted light. 6 elk, grazing lazily, unaware that they were being watched. A cow lifted her head, ears twitching. Her nostrils flared, catching just the faintest whiff of something unnatural. It wasn't human, not a bear, something far different. She turned and she trotted into the woods. The rest followed. The hybrid he did not pursue. He could have, easily. But hunger wasn't the only thing driving him now. He'd never killed for food. His only nourishment had come at the end of a long needle in a tube, a liquid substance with just the right amount of nutrients and components for growth. He had never tasted raw, freshly killed meat, yet his instincts yearned for it. His stomach growled a low, almost canine rumble. Somewhere, buried deep in his memory, he had once had a man's body, lean and human. And now he was something else entirely. Taller than a grizzly, broader than a bull moose, with thick bands of muscle over bone reinforced with something engineered. His hands, while still vaguely human, ended in blackened claws that could rend bark from trees or snap ribs like twigs. From the hills above Chambers Lake, he observed a family setting up a camp. A father struggling with a cheap pop-up tent, a mother swatting mosquitoes, and 2 kids playing near the fire pit. They laughed. They fought over which one was going to get the last marshmallow from a plastic bag. They had no idea that he was only 40 yards away, watching with amused curiosity. He crouched beneath a thicket of dense willow, peering through the branches. He could smell them: soap, propane, polyester. He could hear the zip of the tent and the high-pitched voices, the father's curse under his breath. These were not the creatures who had built the cages, who had placed electrodes against his temples and measured the screams. No, these were not those men. He tilted his head, curious. One of the kids pointed towards the trees, eyes wide. I saw something move. The father turned at him. Probably a raccoon. 13 was already gone, disappearing into the foliage like a ghost of the woods, not because he was afraid, but because he didn't want to be seen. Not yet. Not like this. The others had wanted him to stay, to join their clans. He felt responsible for all those who had come to his aid, and especially those who had suffered in the aftermath of the takeover, but he didn't feel a kinship with them. He could communicate with them, yeah, he could, but he knew he was different. See, they were wild creatures. They were used to living in the wilderness. He was manufactured. Well, he could still remember what it was like to be a man. Now, the memories were fading. They were blurred by trauma, transformation, but they weren't gone. He remembered fear, remembered pain, names. Some were meaningless now. Others echoed. Ghost Horse. The name stirred something ancient in his chest. The man who had once tried to rescue him, who had once tried to stop the painful experiments. Now, could he trust him now? So he continued to move northeast, his gait fluid and deliberate. The land opened into meadows dotted with wildflowers and big boulders. He was above tree line now in the rocky moraine where the air was thinner, the elevation rising as he approached the edge of the Rocky Mountain National Park. The hybrid Jeep tore across a desert floor, kicking up plumes of dust that vanished into the heat shimmering behind him. The sun, still climbing in the sky, had already turned the horizon into molten glass. The barren stretch of sage and stone seemed endless, but Ghost Horse didn't see the road. He saw memories. The past never stayed buried out here, not in Nevada, not in this sun. He drove in silence, one hand resting on the wheel and the other clutching the old pouch of cedar and tobacco the old woman had given him in the high pasture. He breathed it in slowly as the wind rushed through the cracked windows. You can't outpace what you are. He was 7 when they took him, living on the reservation, wiry and strange, speaking to animals when no one was looking. The other kids thought he was weird. His grandmother knew better. They hear you, she whispered once, pressing his forehead to hers. The old ones, the ones that walk between worlds. That's a gift. But it's also a burden. Be careful what you let in. He wasn't careful. The CIA came with promises of education, opportunity, safety. They called it a gifted youth program. Now, that was a lie. He remembered the rooms more than the faces, cold, sterile places where he was hooked to machines and told to reach out to creatures in cages. They called it remote viewing, PSI communication, empathetic bonding, all Cold War buzzwords washed in science fiction. In reality, it was one thing: exploitation. During the Cold War, the CIA and the Department of Defense explored the potential of psychic abilities for intelligence, though the research was ultimately deemed unpromising. However, many universities and psychic research centers continued the research, and they still do to this day. Children and young adults were brought in from all over the United States to be tested and studied. Most were sent back home. But not Ghost Horse. He was good at it. Too good. By the time he was 16, they had already transferred him to a deeper division. Not Langley. Hell, not even Los Alamos. Places with no names and no clocks. That's when he first heard of Project Silva. They started by bringing him into the rooms with the cages. Cryptids, they called them. It was a word to make it seem manageable, containable. Well, Ghost Horse knew better. He had felt them. Not just heard, but truly felt. Their fear, their pain, their confusion, their loneliness. He'd sit in a reinforced chamber, close his eyes, and reach out with that part of himself he'd never really been taught to name. He wasn't just reading thoughts, it was something a lot deeper than that. Primal. It was a merging of emotion and memory as well as communication. And the experimental creatures reached back. Some with fury, others with childlike desperation, all with fear and pain, every last one of them. As the Jeep crested a rise, the Bonneville salt flats opened before him like a shattered lake. Ghost Horse eased off the gas, letting the engine cool, and looked out across the shimmering expanse. This had once been testing ground. Bombs, rockets, silence. Now, just the ghosts of what had been. I tried to stop him. He had warned him again and again. You can't take the soul out of the human. The cryptids, they weren't dumb brutes. They weren't just biological anomalies. They were something that broke the lines between man and myth. Trying to hybridize them, to merge them with soldiers, was like stitching lightning into skin. And still, they pushed forward. When one experiment failed, they tried another. They told him that his gifts were the only way to calm the subjects. In truth, they just needed someone who could understand the screams. But what else could he do? And so he stayed, for years. And then, one night, the screams had turned into words. Hybrid Experiment 013 had spoken to him. Not in English, not in any known language, but Ghost Horse understood exactly what he was saying. You know what they've done. You know what we are. Will you help us die or help us live? He tried to set fire to the holding pins. He cut the power. He tried to release them, but the facility was impenetrable. And because he couldn't stand the pain any longer, he vanished into the desert. Now, as he raced toward Colorado, toward the center of the storm, Ghost Horse felt them again. Faint pulses in the back of his skull. Communication. Ghost Horse adjusted the steering wheel and muttered under his breath, I'm a-comin', old friend, before they find you, or before you decide to find them. The wind howled across the barren salt flats, as if in answer. Michelle gripped the steering wheel tighter as the elevation rose, the highway slicing through jagged red rock and evergreen foothills. Hank's truck shuddered slightly as it climbed the pass, the engine pushing hard against the summer heat. Wind buffeted the sides. Semi-trucks howled past in the opposite lane like restless beasts, but she kept her foot steady on the gas. In the distance, she could see the red rock of Garden of the Gods looming to the right. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat again. It was a text from Hank. Found more files. Going deeper. Let me know when you get to your uncle's. And she didn't respond. Not yet. Her mind was focused, fixed on where she was going and who she needed. Manitou Springs is a quaint little town tucked into the shadows of Pikes Peak, where mineral springs still bubbled out of the ground and shops there sold crystals, tinctures, and hand-woven prayer beads. To Michelle, it was something more. A sanctuary. Her uncle lived there, nestled in a cottage at the edge of the old Ute trails. He was the one her mother used to call the last true seer of the family. He was a quiet man who rarely spoke unless the mountain wind moved him to, but when he did speak, it mattered. She hadn't seen him in years. She took the exit towards Colorado Springs, curving down into the lush pine forest of the Front Range. Well, the air felt different here. Cleaner, sharper, charged. And somewhere far above, Pike's Peak loomed, ancient and eternal. The sun slid behind gathering clouds, casting long shadows across the canyon as she reached the turnoff for Manitou Avenue. She passed by the small tourist shops and the dusty apothecaries and the fountain where people still filled their water jugs from the mineral spring. A woman in a long lavender skirt lit a bundle of sage near a mural of a coyote. Children chased soap bubbles in the city park while wind chimes and dream catchers danced in the trees. Michelle pulled off the road and parked in front of a house wrapped in vines and wildflowers. A rusted windmill spun lazily in the backyard, and on the porch sat her uncle, eyes closed, his long braids hanging over his shoulders. He opened one eye. "You're late," he said, smiling. "I felt you coming." Michelle stepped out of the car, tears already forming. "Uncle Greyhawk, I need your prayers. I need your wisdom. Hank and Wade, they're getting close to something they don't understand." He nodded once, slowly, not surprised, not alarmed, just ready. Come in, child," he said softly, standing up. "We'll call the old ones. They always listen." Ghost Horse stopped at a rest stop at Capitol Reef, the ancient rock formation shaped like the spine of the earth. This part of Utah was sacred to the Indians. The rocks, the canyons, the arches. A raven called out to him, and he answered back. It dipped low and landed in the tree next to the Jeep. He knelt, resting one palm flat against the rock, eyes closed, breath slow, reaching with his mind to the one who needed him. "Hello, brother." Miles away, deep in the back country of the Rocky Mountain National Park, Hybrid 13 froze mid-step. He'd been tracking elk, his muscles tight with instinct. And now he turned his face toward the southeast, toward the edge of the distant range, and lowered himself to the forest floor. He closed his eyes, and he answered. Ghost Horse opened his eyes. The stars were out. The wind had changed. Something ancient had shifted in the world. He stood, brushed the dirt from his palms, and turned towards the east. "Hold on, brother," he whispered. "I'm coming." Well, friends, there's another good little part of the story here. Got plenty more of that next time we see you. Keep Ginger working at these stories. She does an awful good job at it, and I want to thank her. And then there's plenty more on the channel, you know that. Been around for a while. She enjoys doing this for you, and I think we'll do it again next week. So until then, this is Clay Steele. Y'all be good.